I was very much interested in a place where I could think about craft and making and utilitarian design in an intellectual way and bring together a kind of interest in theory and methodology and also a really hands-on sense of making. I completed my MA at the Bard Graduate Center in 2004, and then I returned as a faculty member in 2015, so almost 10 years later. I ended up in an Art Nouveau course my first semester at BGC, and I fell in love with a cutlery service by a German designer. And that designer ended up being the designer I would write my PhD dissertation on, and I'm about to publish a book on him as well. So in a way, that experience really formed the trajectory of my scholarship, for the subsequent 10 years or so. So I ended up doing my PhD at Yale University, and I continued to work on this German designer. His name is Richard Riemerschmidt, and he was active from the late 19th century through the mid-20th century. And the wonderful thing about having worked on him at the BGC, which was part of my master's thesis work, was that when I got to Yale, I found that I was really very much ready to go. I was ready to do my PhD research, and I did coursework, and I interacted with my cohort of students. But I think in contrast to some students there at the time, I really knew, having been at the BGC, having done my MA work, what it was I wanted to focus on. And I felt in a sense like I had a kind of a material archive that I was working from. I've just finished teaching a course with my friend and colleague Michelle Major on the history of fashion, and this is specifically called The Green Hat Fashion in Word and Image, and it's specifically around the idea of fashion as a kind of representation, but also representations of fashion. So we looked a lot at fiction sources, period fiction, some historical fiction, to get sort of, I would say, to really get at the stories of how clothes were worn, what that meant. So not just to know the accurate details of an ensemble, let's say, but to understand the meanings. And also we looked at a lot of images. So we looked at a lot of portraits, we looked at caricatures, we looked at fashion plates in period journals. For me, the most rewarding scholarship happens, both in my own work and when I see students working, when they can sort of start a conversation with these different sources, when they can pull in fiction, but they can also pull in an architectural treatise, or they can also pull in a diary entry. And especially, I think, something that we forget to talk about, but it's so obvious, really looking at the objects themselves, right? Because they do speak for themselves, and we assign all kinds of stories to them, and this happens throughout history. But I also really encourage students to spend time with objects, really closely looking and thinking, as one really key piece of primary evidence, right? So it's putting all those things, in relation to one another. I think that yields the fullest scholarship and the meatiest, the most exciting scholarship.